Hi everyone, I'm Walia. Welcome to another installment of Mindset Mondays. Today's topic is how big tech can influence us and improve our own personal lives. What are the lessons we can take from the world's biggest firms, such as the FAANG companies, and just the general software development process? So without further ado, let's get into it. So today's modern software development lifecycle process is about doing a quick set of planning. So there's a classic plan, do, check, and adjust. That is basically empirical evidence. So when you make some plans and you structure out what you plan to do, you execute, and all of these are very finite, small tranches of time and effort. You execute, and then you inspect. So transparency, inspection, adaptation. So when you inspect what you've done, you weigh it up empirically in an objective fashion with multiple stakeholders, and you analyze it, whether that's with your users or end consumers or knowledgeable people, testers. You check what's working and what isn't working. You discard what isn't working immediately, and you build off what was working for your next round. So we said plan, do, check, and adjust. That adjustment process is now saying what worked, adjusting for it, and then continuing. That continuous improvement, also known as Kaizen, the Japanese word. Now, let's move on a bit. Now, the whole process around this whole cyclical situation is to, as quickly as possible, we know what the best practice is. It's something that I'm trying to apply in every facet of my life, which is the idea of a minimum MVP, minimum viable product. Now, the minimum viable product is essentially about ensuring that you get a quick and dirty version of what you had in mind, what you want to execute. Having a very basic prototype in front of you and getting that out to people who would use it is the best way. It's much better than spending ages planning, ages having surveys, marketing, blah, blah, blah. Actually have something. It could be quite different from what your end result will be, and you're going to have to pivot several times, but the quicker you can get something tangible in front of people, a lot comes out of it. Have those people test it, use it, give feedback, until you've got a situation where there's a huge demand, like a reasonably sticky idea, where there's actually demonstrable and quantifiable sort of interest in your product, and people are actually willing to pay for it. Then you start getting onto something. You pivot and lean into that direction. So in everything we do, we can take bite-sized steps towards something, and when we get an indication of the fact that there is traction here, we double down. So in my past life, what I would tend to do was, just out of a love for something, I jump into something, invest a lot of money into it, and we all waste a lot of time being extremely stubborn and having these blind spots where we just do things and are not helping anyone, and we're totally just flushing money down the drain. Let's chase value. And so in those organizations, they have a value stream. So the flow of where the value is going can unearth new principles. So with every single situation, it's a very design thinking kind of process. Now, another thing is about continuous improvement, but also they like to have quick and frequent releases of their software. For example, Spotify, Netflix, we might not know, but in the background, there's several releases taking place a day. So the actual product, the front UX experience that we have, behind all of that, there's constant deployment of changes to the software product that we are enjoying every day. Now, that also lets you know that gives an example of small iterations, so that you never make that bigger mistake, because at any point they can always roll back to the previous version, a bit like a Google Doc or any sort of digital document. We should be that way in our lives, so we can always quickly back out of a misstep when we make a wrong decision, a fork in the road, something we invested in, a role. We don't need to go all in, because we do everything in small iteration and tranches. Same thing happens for when you cannot see the end product yet. In your life, you apply that 1% and do your very best every day. That by the end of the year, that little 1% amounts to 37 times better. I say that all the time. It's such an important concept of compound interest of effort, to constantly get a better product all the time. That is equal to having a better you if you apply that principle. Now, Software development life cycles are very short periods of things like creating at inception, sort of like the grounds, the overall structure, governance, and then you have things like requirements gathering, you would have things like specification design, you would have things like, so those are requirements engineering, specification design, the actual build, you're actually constructing and executing. We live in a world where execution is everything. Ideas mean nothing. Implementation and application of those ideas with a feedback loop is everything. So once you've built the code, you have several sets of tests. You got that unit test that a developer would do. You would then have a system integration test. Well, you have a unit test a developer would do. You have a QA test, which is a quality assurance test. Then you have a sort of what we would call a system integration test to make sure that all the different parts of the whole are working. You also have regression testing. That actually happens more during unit and QA. You get bits of regression to make sure that the new change you're applying is working with the pre-existing change, so that your new iteration doesn't break what was there before. Now, system integration test is like, as a unit, is it working with the rest of the sum of the parts across your entire architecture framework and your stack, essentially, your architectural stack. Now, the next thing is user acceptance testing, which is in front of the consumer and the end user. This is where the gold is. There's a lot of finer detail. People don't know what they want until they've seen it. So when you do give them something, a lot of data comes out and a lot of further suggestions, and that can lead to scope creep. You need to now decide and prioritize. Everything we do is prioritization. It's no secret that books like Atomic Habits are absolutely bestsellers because it's about habit stacking and making habits much easier to do. So in a similar way, the users as people, when they see the actual and they interact with something, you get a lot of feedback. And so in everything we do, when we manage our lives, like what Atomic Habits will teach you, your life needs to be a reverse engineered setup to support the person you want to be. You have to have the systems, the structure. So when you wake up, what you eat, when you eat it, your health regime, your work hours, everything, you're supposed to be optimizing all the time. Now, all of that should be based around your top 5 priorities. There could be 5, there could be 3, what have you. The world's, biggest, businessmen and moguls always say they're good at saying no. There's that Warren Buffett saying that he writes a list of everything he might want to do, and he picks maybe the top 1 to 3 and never forgets the rest of them. That's what we could apply, because I have this problem and I'm being told every day. So this is one that I don't actually follow, hands up, full disclaimer. I'm actually having to work on it and narrow down my 10 things I want to do down to 5, and now down to 3, and only working on 3 at a time. And even that 3, they vary. My week will be split into 3 to tackle them, and only doing 1 per day. So every 2 days I might switch, but at least in a given time, the whole concept of juggling and multitasking does not work. The context switching hurts. So in terms of tasks we're going to do, we try to do similar tasks. We batch them at the same time. We take calls at the same time, like a bunch of meetings all in one day. We have deep work for a couple hours and another point at a time when we know that we'll have minimal interruptions, or we actually structure our day to not be able to receive phone notifications or get interruptions. Now, these are just some examples. I hope this was helpful. So these are some key concepts of how the whole sort of tech industry, startups and things can influence some, and we can borrow some lessons.